The fluorescent lights of Sterling Media's fourth floor hummed their familiar drone at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, the kind of late October night when Chicago's skyline pressed against the windows, like a promise of life happening somewhere else. Claire Morrison stood alone in the executive bathroom, the lock turned behind her, the world narrowed to her reflection, and the truth she carried beneath pressed cotton and tailored wool. Her fingers moved to the top button of her blouse, then the second, the third. Each one released felt like a small surrender to gravity and time, in the relentless inventory her mind conducted every night before sleep refused to come. The blazer came off first, draped over the marble counter with the kind of precision that had carried her through 2 decades of corporate warfare. Vice President of Regional Operations, 40 employees under her command, a corner office with a view that cost the company $65,000 a year in rent alone. None of it mattered when the blouse fell open. The scar began just below her sternum, a thick rope of tissue that carved southeast across her abdomen before wrapping around her right side like some cartographer had tried to map the border between survival and extinction. 3 years since the surgery. 3 years since Dr. Patel had looked at her across a desk much like her own and delivered the verdict with the kind of professional detachment Claire now recognized as mercy. Stage 3 gastric cancer, partial gastrectomy, required 70% of your stomach, removed extensive scarring, inevitable, but you'll be alive. And isn't that what matters? Her phone buzzed against the counter. The screen lit up with a notification from the dating app she downloaded 6 weeks ago during a moment of wine-fueled optimism. You have 3 new matches. See who's interested. Claire picked up the phone, opened the app, scrolled through the faces of men who smiled at cameras, posed with dogs, held up fish they'd caught, or cocktails they'd mixed. Their profiles spoke of hiking and craft beer and looking for someone who doesn't take life too seriously. Her thumb hovered over the first profile. A lawyer, 42, divorced. His bio mentioned a gym routine and a weakness for sushi. She wondered how long it would take him to find an excuse once he saw what lay beneath her carefully constructed exterior. 2 dates, 3. Mark had made it to the 4th before the excuses started. Trevor hadn't even bothered with excuses. He'd just left. Claire deleted the app. Not just the notification, but the entire application, watching it wobble on her screen before vanishing into digital oblivion. 3 years cancer-free felt like a victory until you remembered it also meant 3 years of eating alone, sleeping alone, carrying the weight of survival without anyone to help shoulder the load. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. She buttoned her blouse, quickly reached for her blazer, tried to arrange her face into something that resembled the woman everyone expected to see. A knock. "Miss Morrison, are you in there?" Claire unlocked the door. Bryn Sullivan stood in the hallway, her 28-year-old face carrying the kind of concern that came from working too closely with someone for too long. "I'm fine, just needed a moment." Bryn didn't look convinced, but had learned when to press and when to retreat. "There's someone from facilities here about the vent in your office. Should I send them away?" Claire straightened her blazer, checked her reflection one last time. The executive armor back in place. "No, send them up." What Claire Morrison didn't know as she walked back toward her office was that the man about to knock on her door would look at those scars she'd just hidden and speak 5 words that would crack open the fortress she'd spent 3 years building. "I'm not going anywhere." Nathan Gallagher's alarm went off at 5:30 every morning, a habit formed during 2 decades of working with his hands and raising a daughter who needed breakfast on the table by 6:15. The house in Evanston was quiet in that particular way that single fathers learned to measure, not silent, because Harper's breathing carried through the walls, but absent of the partnership that had once filled the spaces between waking and sleeping. He moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of repetition. Eggs scrambled in a pan his wife had bought at a yard sale 11 years ago, back when they were saving for the house, and Harper was still small enough to carry on one hip. The bread went into the toaster, orange juice poured into 2 glasses, pills laid out beside his own plate, a multivitamin, fish oil, the low-dose aspirin his doctor had suggested after he turned 40. Dad Harper appeared in the doorway, her hair a tangle of brown that would take 10 minutes and half a bottle of detangler to manage. At 11, she stood on the edge of that transformation from girl to something more complicated. Rebecca would have known how to navigate it. Nate was learning as he went. Morning bug, breakfast in 5. She slid into her chair, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she slept in, her science textbook already open to a page about ecosystems. I have the test today, the one about aquatic environments. I know. You've been studying it all week. You're ready. Harper's fingers traced the diagram of a pond ecosystem, her expression carrying the weight of 11-year-old perfectionism. What if I'm not? What if Mrs. Chen asks about the bacterial colonies and I forget the difference between aerobic and anaerobic decomposition? Nate set the plate in front of her, then crouched beside her chair until their eyes were level. This was the part Rebecca had been better at, the emotional scaffolding that held up a child's confidence when the world felt too big and the tests too hard. Here's what I know about you. When you were 7 and mom got sick, you learned every single medical term the doctors used. You could explain chemotherapy to your second-grade class better than I could explain it to my coworkers. You've got the kind of brain that grabs onto information and doesn't let go. Mrs. Chen's test doesn't stand a chance. Harper's mouth twitched toward a smile. Did you check my terrarium last night? I thought it looked too dry. Already handled. The moisture sensor was reading low, so I adjusted the misting cycle. Should maintain humidity between 60 and 70% now. You fixed the timer. Rebuilt it with parts from that old sprinkler system in the garage. Works better than the original. Harper wrapped her arms around his neck, quick and fierce, then let go just as fast. You're the best dad. After breakfast, after Harper caught the bus with her perfectly prepared terrarium and her perfectly prepared index cards, Nate stood on the porch and watched Mr. Wilson shuffle out to retrieve his newspaper from the frost-covered lawn. The old man moved slowly these days, his spine curved by 8 decades of gravity. Nate got a minute. They met at the property line, that invisible border marked by slightly different shades of grass in the chain-link fence Nate had helped install 5 summers ago. Kitchen faucet's dripping again. I tried tightening the valve, but I think the gasket's shot. I've got extras in the garage. Let me grab my tools and I'll be over in 10. Mr. Wilson reached for his wallet. How much do I owe you? Last time you wouldn't let me pay. You helped Harper with her history report last month. Spent 3 hours going through your military photos from Korea. That's worth more than a gasket. That's different. That's just talking. And this is just plumbing. We're neighbors, Frank. That's how it works. Nate fixed the faucet in 15 minutes, replaced a loose handle on the kitchen cabinet while he was there, and made it to Sterling Media by 7:30. The facilities office sat in the basement level, tucked between the boiler room and the storage area, where the company kept old furniture and broken dreams. His desk held a hand-drawn schematic of the building's electrical system, updated over 6 months to reflect every weird bypass and jury-rigged connection the previous maintenance crew had installed. A photo of Harper stood next to his coffee mug, her school picture from last year, the one where she'd smiled with her mouth closed because she was missing both front teeth. The thermos came next, filled with coffee strong enough to power industrial machinery. He'd learned early in his career that the cheap stuff from the break room was designed to keep you conscious, not functional. His own blend from beans ground that morning was designed to make you good at your job. Blessings did not arrive in the form he expected. At 8 o'clock, Tom Bradley called down from the third-floor marketing department, his voice carrying the particular edge of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted immediately. Gallagher, the AC is dead. Meeting in 2 hours. Important clients. Fix it. No greeting. No please. Just the assumption that Nate existed to solve problems created by systems Tom Bradley didn't understand and wouldn't appreciate once they were working again. I'll be right up. The toolkit went over his shoulder. Nate took the stairs because the elevator was slower and because 20 years of this work had taught him that a man who stayed physically capable could fix problems other men needed machines to handle. The third floor felt like a sauna, the October sun heating the west-facing windows until the glass itself seemed to sweat. The AC unit sat on the roof, accessible through a maintenance door that required 2 keys and a willingness to climb a ladder that made OSHA inspectors nervous. Nate checked the panel. First circuit breaker tripped, but he didn't reset it immediately. That would be the amateur move, the kind of fix that lasted until the underlying problem reasserted itself. The unit's cover came off with practiced ease. Inside, the story revealed itself in burn marks and frayed insulation. Rodents. They chewed through the wiring, probably looking for nesting material or salt from the insulation coating. The damaged wire had created a short which tripped the breaker. Reset it without fixing the cause, and the whole thing would trip again, possibly starting a fire this time. 45 minutes later, with new wiring installed, the coils cleaned of accumulated dust and a layer of rodent deterrent applied to vulnerable access points, the AC hummed back to life. The air flowing through the vents carried that particular chill of machinery working at peak efficiency. Tom Bradley appeared in the break room as Nate was washing his hands. About time, the clients show up in an hour and I can't have them sweating through their shirts. No thank you. No acknowledgement of the fire hazard that had been eliminated or the system now running better than it had in months. Just the expectation that this was what Nate was paid for. You should report the rodent problem to building management. There's evidence of nesting in multiple junction boxes. That's a fire hazard for the whole floor. Tom glanced up from his phone, his expression suggesting this conversation was already taking longer than his interest could sustain. Yeah, sure, I'll mention it. He wouldn't. Nate had been doing this work long enough to know which promises were real and which were just noises people made to end conversations. Ellen Pierce caught him in the hallway on his way back to the basement. She managed the cleaning crew, a woman in her mid-50s who'd been with Sterling Media longer than most of the executives had been alive. Mr. Gallagher, I wanted to thank you again for fixing that washing machine. The one in the utility room downstairs. No problem, Ellen. Just needed a new belt. They were going to throw it out, said it wasn't worth repairing, but you took it home and fixed it and brought it back. Now my crew doesn't have to wash rags by hand. Machine was fine, just needed someone to look at it. Ellen's expression carried something deeper than gratitude, a recognition that lived in the space between social classes where the people who cleaned the offices understood who treated them like human beings and who treated them like furniture that occasionally needed maintenance. You're different than most of them upstairs. They don't even know our names, but you remember. You ask about our families. That matters. Nate had learned this truth from his father, a firefighter who'd spent 30 years pulling people from burning buildings without ever learning to treat service workers as if they were invisible. Respect doesn't come from the title on your door or the number on your paycheck. It comes from how you treat the person fixing your toilet when they're on their knees with their hands covered in your waste. If you can look them in the eye and say thank you like you mean it, you're doing it right. Everything else is just pretending to be civilized. The heating vent in Claire Morrison's office had been making noise for 3 days, a rhythmic rattle that set her teeth on edge during conference calls and made concentration feel like wading through static. By Thursday evening, with the building mostly empty and her patients mostly exhausted, she'd finally asked Bryn to call facilities and get someone up to look at it. She hadn't expected the facilities director himself. Nathan Gallagher knocked at 7:15, his appearance in her doorway, carrying the particular quality of a man who'd come from somewhere else, physically, socially, economically. He wore work clothes that had been laundered but not pressed, carried a toolbox that showed years of use, and met her eyes with the directness of someone who had never learned to be intimidated by corner offices. Ms. Morrison, I'm Nate Gallagher, Facilities Director. Your assistant mentioned an issue with the vent. Claire gestured toward the corner where the noise originated, her attention split between the spreadsheet on her screen and this unexpected intrusion into her carefully maintained solitude. It's been rattling for days. Probably nothing. Gallagher moved past her desk with an economy of motion that suggested he'd spent a lifetime in spaces that weren't his own, learning how to occupy minimal square footage while accomplishing maximum work. He set his toolbox down, pulled out a small ladder, and climbed up to examine the vent cover with the kind of focused attention Claire usually only saw in operating rooms or war zones. In my experience, probably nothing usually means definitely something. Mind if I take a look inside? She nodded, returned to her spreadsheet, tried to focus on quarterly projections while this stranger dismantled her office infrastructure. 5 minutes passed. The rattling stopped. Found your problem. Gallagher climbed down, holding a piece of bent metal that looked like it had been torn from a larger mechanism. In his hands, it became very evidence in a case Claire hadn't realized needed solving. This was vibrating against the duct every time the system cycled on. Should be quiet now. Thank you. I appreciate you coming up so late. He packed his tools with the same efficiency he'd used to unpack them, each item finding its designated slot in a system only he understood. Not a problem. I'm here anyway, waiting for my daughter to finish Girl Scouts. The mention of a daughter landed differently than Claire expected, not as irrelevant personal information, but as a glimpse into a life that extended beyond these walls in directions she'd stopped imagining for herself. How old? 11. Harper, currently obsessed with aquatic ecosystems. I understand about 30% of what she tries to explain to me. That's impressive, her dedication, I mean. She's competing in the school science fair this weekend. Built this whole terrarium thing with self-regulating moisture and bacterial colonies. I helped with the mechanical parts, but the actual science is beyond me. Gallagher finished packing, lifted the toolbox, and paused at the threshold of her office, as if weighing whether to cross back out into the hallway or stay suspended in this moment of unexpected connection. Do you have children, Miss Morrison? Sorry, that's not a work-appropriate question. Claire's hand stilled on her keyboard. The question hung in the air between them, innocent and impossible. No, I don't have children. The silence that followed felt heavier than it should, as if her denial had mass and weight and took up space in the room. Gallagher seemed to sense he'd stepped on something fragile. Well, I should let you get back to work. Have a good evening. Mr. Gallagher? He turned back. Are you raising your daughter alone? The question emerged before Claire could calculate whether asking it was wise or professional, or any of the things she usually calculated before words left her mouth. But something in his manner, the careful way he'd mentioned Girl Scouts, the pride wrapped around his daughter's name, suggested a story with missing pieces. His expression shifted, guard lowering by degrees measured in fractions of seconds. Yes, 3.5 years now. Claire waited. She'd learned in boardrooms that silence was often more effective than questions at drawing out truth. My wife, Rebecca, breast cancer. She fought for 2 years before it took her. Harper was 7 when we lost her. 8 when she stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. The words arrived without self-pity, delivered with the same straightforward competence he'd used to identify the problem with her vent. These were facts. This was the situation. He'd adapted his life around them the same way he'd adapted her office climate control around a piece of bent metal. Claire felt something crack in her chest. Hairline fractures in the armor she'd welded into place over 3 years of surviving alone. I'm sorry, that's an inadequate response to loss, but I don't know what else to say. Most people avoid saying anything. They treat it like talking about cancer might be contagious. Her breath caught. The spreadsheet on her screen blurred into meaningless numbers. People do that with illness generally, as if acknowledging it might make them vulnerable to the same fate. Gallagher's eyes sharpened, some recognition passing across his features that Claire couldn't quite interpret. Cancer. The world tilted. How did he know she hadn't told anyone at Sterling Media? Bryn suspected but had never asked directly. The medical leave 3 years ago had been classified as a personal health matter, the details protected by HIPAA and corporate HR policies designed to prevent exactly this kind of exposure. How did you come? I recognize the signs, the hand sanitizer on your desk, the herbal tea instead of coffee, the way you touch things carefully like you're constantly aware of potential contamination. My wife did the same thing. Toward the end. Claire's hands moved to her desktop, fingers finding the jumbo-sized bottle of Perel she kept within constant reach. She'd thought it was invisible, just another object in a workspace full of objects. But to someone who'd watched cancer consume a person he loved, apparently it glowed like a beacon. Gastric. 3 years ago. Stage 3. I survived. That's a victory. Claire laughed, the sound bitter even to her own ears. A very lonely victory. She hadn't meant to say that. Hadn't meant to let slip the truth that kept her awake at 2 in the morning, when the apartment was silent and the city lights through her window seemed to mock the life she wasn't living. But something about this man, this stranger with his toolbox and his daughter and his dead wife, made concealment feel more exhausting than honesty. Gallagher set his toolbox down, took 3 steps back into her office, crossing the threshold from hallway to private space with visible deliberation. Ms. Morrison. Claire, please call me Claire. Claire, there's a food truck festival this weekend at Grant Park, after Harper's Science Fair. Nothing fancy, just tacos and live music. Would you maybe want to join us? The invitation landed like something dropped from a great height. Claire felt her defenses snap back into place, muscle memory taking over where rational thought had briefly abdicated. I can't. Of course, I understand. It was inappropriate. No, it's not you. It's just that no one wants to date me. Not really. The confession emerged raw and unfiltered, 3 years of rejection compressed into a single sentence. Claire watched Gallagher process this information, saw him run through calculations she couldn't quite track. I find that very hard to believe. You wouldn't if you knew. Her hands moved to the buttons of her blouse before her conscious mind could intervene and stop what was about to happen. This was insanity. This was the kind of self-destructive impulse that therapists warned about and HR departments existed to prevent. But exhaustion had its own logic, and Claire had been exhausted for 3 years. She turned away from him, lifted the back of her blouse just enough to reveal where the scar began at her spine and wrapped around toward her abdomen a red-brown rope of tissue that told the story her words couldn't quite convey. 10 seconds of silence. Claire counted them, each one stretching into its own small eternity. She waited for the excuses she'd heard before. Mark's carefully constructed explanation about not being ready for this level of commitment. Trevor's wordless departure, his clothes gathered in silence, and his goodbye delivered through the click of her apartment door closing. Instead, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Gentle. Present. Claire, look at me. She turned to letting her blouse fall back into place, unable to meet his eyes because she'd learned that pity hurt worse than rejection. I'm not going anywhere. Claire looked up, searched his face for signs of the performance she'd experienced before the careful expression meant to soften an inevitable exit. But Gallagher's eyes held something else. Recognition. Understanding. The particular empathy of someone who'd stood in the wreckage of bodies failing and love persisting through the failure. I watched Rebecca fight for 2 years before cancer took her. I know what scars mean. They mean you survived. They mean you're still here. The tears came before Claire could stop them, a dam breaking after 3 years of careful maintenance. She tried to speak to explain that most men didn't see it this way, but Gallagher continued before she could form words. Then you've been meeting the wrong men. I'm a package deal than an 11-year-old who discusses bacterial decomposition at breakfast. You're a successful woman with battle scars that prove you don't give up. Maybe we could just be real people together and see what happens. For the first time in 3 years, Claire felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not hope exactly. Hope felt too fragile, too easily crushed. But possibility. The sense that the story she'd been telling herself about her life might have chapters she hadn't yet imagined. I do like tacos. Gallagher smiled, the expression transforming his face from competent professional to something warmer, more accessible. Saturday, 2 o'clock. Lincoln Elementary for the science fair, then Grant Park for the festival. I'll text you the details. After he left after the door closed and her office returned to its familiar silence, Claire sat alone with her spreadsheet and her herbal tea and the jumbo bottle of hand sanitizer that apparently broadcast her history to anyone who knew how to read the signs. She picked up her phone, started typing a text to her sister Diane, then deleted it. Started again. Deleted again. Finally, she just whispered to the empty room. He said he's not going anywhere. Did he really mean that? The city lights outside her window offered no answers, just their usual indifferent glow. Claire Morrison's apartment in Lincoln Park occupied the 14th floor of a building that had been luxury condos in the 90s and was now just expensive housing with aging appliances and water pressure issues. The management company addressed through strongly worded memos rather than actual repairs. She arrived home at 9:30, hung her blazer on the hook by the door and stood in her kitchen without turning on the lights. The scar felt hot beneath her blouse, as if Nathan Gallagher's eyes had left some residual warmth on tissue that hadn't felt anything but pain and shame for 3 years. She'd shown him. Actually lifted her shirt and revealed the things she'd hidden from everyone, except medical professionals and men who'd subsequently decided she wasn't worth the complication. And he'd said, I'm not going anywhere. Claire poured a glass of wine, red. The expensive bottle Diane had given her for her 38th birthday, with instructions to save it for something worth celebrating. She'd been saving it for 2 months, waiting for a promotion or a milestone or some external validation that her life was progressing according to plan. But tonight felt like its own kind of milestone, the first time in 3 years she'd taken off the armor and someone had chosen to stay rather than run. She drank half the glass standing at the window, watching traffic move along the street below like blood cells through arteries, each vehicle carrying its own cargo of lives and decisions, and moments that would either matter or fade into the background noise of existence. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "This is Nate Gallagher from Sterling Media Facilities. Harper wanted me to warn you that she takes her interview responsibilities very seriously. 2 o'clock Saturday at Lincoln Elementary, Science Fair Exhibition Hall. I promise she's mostly kidding about the interrogation." Mostly? Claire read the message 3 times, composed 4 different responses, deleted 3 of them, and finally settled on, "I'll bring my resume. See you Saturday." His response came immediately. "She'll appreciate the preparation. Sleep well, Claire." The use of her first name felt intimate in a way that professional correspondence never achieved. "Sleep well, Claire," as if he genuinely cared whether she rested or spent the night replaying their conversation and wondering if she'd just made the most mortifying mistake of her professional life. She finished her wine, changed into the oversized t-shirt she slept in, lay in bed with her phone on the nightstand and her thoughts circling like sharks around the memory of his hand on her shoulder, and the 5 words that refused to stop echoing, "I'm not going anywhere." At 2 in the morning, still awake, Claire finally admitted to herself what had shifted during those 10 minutes in her office. For 3 years, she'd been telling herself a story about her life that cancer had won, even though she'd survived it. Her body was now a liability rather than an asset, that the kind of love other people found wasn't available to someone who came with medical baggage and visible damage. Nathan Gallagher had looked at her scars and seen victory instead of defeat. He'd lost his wife to cancer, and instead of running from anything that reminded him of that loss, he'd moved closer, offered connection, suggested that maybe 2 broken people could be real together instead of pretending to be whole separately. Claire reached for her phone, opened her contacts, found her sister's number. The text went through at 2:14 a.m. "Are you awake?" Diane's response came 30 seconds later. "Only if you are. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I think I have a date on Saturday." The phone rang immediately. Claire answered before it could ring twice. "You have a what?" "A date, maybe. I'm not sure if it counts as a date when his daughter is going to be there conducting interviews." "Start from the beginning. Who is this person and why haven't I heard about him until 2 in the morning?" Claire told her about the vent, the conversation, the moment of insanity, when she'd lifted her blouse and shown her scars to a man she barely knew. Diane listened without interrupting, a skill she'd perfected during Claire's treatment, when every conversation had been weighted with the possibility of bad news and permanent endings. "And what did he say when he saw them?" "He said he's not going anywhere, that he knows what scars mean because he watched his wife fight cancer for 2 years. That scars mean I survived." Silence on the line. Then Diane's voice softer than before. "Do you believe him?" "I don't know. Mark said similar things at first. Trevor seemed interested until the moment he actually saw what I was hiding. But this man isn't Mark or Trevor. He's someone who's already been through the worst thing that can happen to a family. Someone who knows what cancer looks like from the other side. Or someone who's going to run the moment he realizes dating me means potentially going through that again." "Claire," Diane's tone shifted into the particular register she used when her little sister was being unreasonable. "Do you remember what you told me after you finished chemo, when you were so sick you could barely stand, and I asked if you regretted fighting so hard to survive?" Claire remembered. She'd been in the bathroom of Diane's house in Indianapolis, vomiting into the toilet while her sister held back her hair, and they both pretended this was normal and manageable and temporary. "I said I'd rather die trying to live than spend whatever time I had left just waiting to die." Exactly. So why are you applying different logic to dating? You survived cancer because you fought for every day. Now you're letting fear kill the part of you that wanted those days to mean something. The truth of it settled over Claire like weight. She'd been so focused on protecting herself from rejection that she'd forgotten what she was supposed to be protecting, the life she'd fought so hard to keep. "What if I go on Saturday and he realizes I'm not worth the complication?" "Then you'll know, and you'll be exactly where you are now, alone but survivable. But maybe, just maybe, he'll show up and keep showing up, and you'll discover that the story you've been telling yourself about your life was wrong." After they hung up, Claire lay in the dark and thought about Nathan Gallagher, standing in her office with his toolbox and his dead wife and his daughter, who talked about bacterial decomposition at breakfast. She thought about the way he'd looked at her Scars not with pity or disgust, or the careful distance of someone already planning their exit, but with recognition. Understanding, the particular empathy of someone who'd learned that bodies fail, but love doesn't have to fail with them. At 3 o'clock, she finally slept. Friday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October cold that made Chicago feel like the Midwest city it actually was, rather than the aspirational coastal metropolis its residents sometimes pretended it had become. Claire woke at 6, showered, stood before her closet, trying to decide what executive armor would protect her from whatever this day would bring. The office felt different when she arrived at 7:30. Same furniture, same view of the skyline, same stack of reports waiting on her desk. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between Thursday evening and Friday morning, as if Nathan Gallagher's presence had altered the molecular structure of the air. Bryn appeared at 8 with coffee, the good stuff from the place 3 blocks away that cost $7 a cup, but tasted like someone actually cared about the beans. You look different. Claire accepted the coffee, took a sip, and tried to arrange her face into something approaching neutral. Different how? I don't know, lighter, less like you're carrying the weight of 40 employees and quarterly projections on your shoulders alone. Maybe I slept well. Bryn's expression suggested she wasn't buying the deflection, but had decided not to push. She set a folder on Claire's desk, the quarterly review reports that needed signatures before Monday. Also, there's been some chatter in the break room about you and the facilities director. Claire's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. What kind of chatter? The usual stuff. Someone from marketing saw him in your office late Thursday, door closed, for 30 minutes. Karen from cleaning mentioned something about seeing you two talking in a way that looked intense. You know how it is. People see patterns even when there might not be patterns to see. The familiar weight settled back onto Claire's shoulders. This was why she'd stayed alone for 3 years. Not just because men ran when they saw her scars, but because workplace relationships came with complications that extended beyond the personal into the professional territory she'd worked 2 decades to establish. Schedule a meeting with Robert Hastings in HR. 10 o'clock if he's available. I need to proactively manage this before it becomes an issue. Bryn's eyebrows rose. So there is something to manage? Maybe, possibly, I'm not entirely sure. But I'd rather disclose early than have HR receive anonymous reports suggesting impropriety. At 9:45, Claire walked down to the 3rd floor where Human Resources occupied a suite designed to make employees feel simultaneously welcomed and monitored. Robert Hastings sat behind a desk that held framed photos of his wife and 2 teenage sons, alongside certificates from various HR training programs that promised to turn human problems into manageable data points. Claire, good to see you. Bryn mentioned you wanted to discuss something time-sensitive. She sat across from him, hands folded in her lap, posture perfect, despite the anxiety crawling up her spine like insects seeking warmer places to nest. I wanted to proactively disclose a potential relationship situation before it becomes complicated by rumors or misunderstandings. Hastings pulled out a yellow legal pad, his expression shifting into the particular neutrality HR professionals cultivated when navigating the space between supporting employees and protecting the company. Go ahead. Nathan Gallagher from Facilities and I had a conversation Thursday evening. He was in my office to repair a vent. During that conversation, personal topics came up. His late wife, my medical history. He subsequently invited me to attend a food truck festival with him and his daughter this weekend. Have you accepted? Yes. Hastings wrote something on his pad, looked up. Is there a direct reporting relationship between you? No, he reports to the CFO's office. I'm regional operations. Our departments interact on facility maintenance issues, but there's no supervisory connection. Have there been any promises of favorable treatment, budget allocations, or preferential handling of maintenance requests? No, this was a personal conversation that occurred after normal business hours. Hastings set down his pen. His expression softened from HR professional to something approaching human. Claire, I appreciate you coming to me directly. Too many people try to hide these situations until they become problems. The fact that you're here now tells me you want to handle this appropriately. I do. What's the protocol? For relationships between employees in different departments with no supervisory connection, The protocol is transparency. You'll need to update your conflict of interest disclosure if this develops beyond a single outing. Any decisions involving facilities budgets or maintenance prioritization should be reviewed by a third party to prevent even the appearance of favoritism. And if the relationship ends, both parties need to disclose that as well so we can manage any potential workplace tension. That's it. No transfer requirements or reassignment. Not unless you or Mr. Gallagher request it. The policy is designed to manage conflicts of interest, not prevent employees from having personal lives. As long as you maintain professional boundaries at work and disclose appropriately, you're complying with company standards. Relief flooded through Claire's chest like warm water. Thank you. I know some companies are more restrictive about these situations. Hastings smiled. Some companies treat their employees like they can't be trusted to behave professionally around each other. Sterling Media's approach is to assume adults can manage their personal relationships without it destroying the workplace, as long as everyone involved is honest about what's happening. Claire stood, shook his hand, and walked back to her office, feeling like she'd just navigated a minefield without triggering any explosives. The disclosure was complete. If anyone whispered about her and Nathan Gallagher now, she could point to the paperwork and the appropriate protocols and the fact that she'd done everything by the book. The rest of Friday passed in the usual rhythm of meetings and emails and strategic decisions that would affect budgets and careers and the trajectory of a media company trying to survive in an industry being dismantled by technology. But underneath the normal flow of work, Claire felt something else moving. Anticipation mixed with terror, mixed with the unfamiliar sensation of having something to look forward to beyond quarterly reports and annual reviews. At 6 o'clock, her phone buzzed with another text from Nathan Gallagher. Harper wanted me to tell you she's prepared a list of questions. I've reviewed them and vetoed the ones that felt too much like a background check. But fair warning, she's still going to ask about your favorite element on the periodic table and whether you think Pluto should be reinstated as a planet. See you tomorrow. Claire laughed out loud in her empty office. Responded, I'll prepare my defense of Pluto's planetary status. 2 o'clock at Lincoln Elementary. His reply came as she was gathering her things to leave, looking forward to it. 3 words that felt like a promise. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if Chicago had decided to grant one more day of autumn before committing to winter's eventual conquest. Claire stood in front of her closet at noon, staring at options that ranged from too formal to too casual to trying too hard to look like not trying. She finally settled on dark jeans, a light blue sweater that wasn't too executive and wasn't too casual, and boots that could handle walking through Grant Park without looking like she'd dressed for a corporate board meeting. The mirror reflected someone who looked almost like a person going on a date rather than someone armoring up for battle. The drive to Lincoln Elementary took 20 minutes through Saturday traffic that moved with the particular laziness of a city not rushing to work. Claire parked in the visitor lot, checked her reflection one more time, and walked toward the gymnasium where signs promised Annual Science Fair, Community Welcome. In the exhibition hall buzzed with the organized chaos of 11-year-olds explaining complex scientific concepts to parents who nodded with varying degrees of comprehension. Claire scanned the room, looking for Nathan Gallagher's auburn hair, and finding him instead in profile beside a table where a girl, Harper, clearly stood next to a glass terrarium that looked like it belonged in a research laboratory rather than an elementary school gymnasium. Harper saw her first, nudged her father. They both turned. Claire walked toward them carrying a small bouquet of daisies she'd picked up from the flower shop 3 blocks from her apartment because showing up empty-handed to an 11-year-old science fair felt wrong in ways she couldn't quite articulate. Claire Morrison, meet Harper Gallagher. Harper, this is Ms. Morrison from Dad's work. Harper extended her hand with the seriousness of someone conducting official business. Her grip was firm, her eyes direct hazel like her father's, but carrying an intensity that suggested Rebecca's genes had contributed more than just hair color and bone structure. It's nice to meet you, Miss Morrison. Dad says you're very important at his company. Please call me Claire. And your dad is pretty important too. The building would fall apart without him. He says that about you. That you run things, but nobody sees all the work because good management is invisible. Claire glanced at Nathan, who had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. Your dad is generous. These are for you. Congratulations on making the science fair. Harper accepted the daisies with visible pleasure, then immediately set them aside to return to what clearly mattered more than flowers or social niceties. Would you like to see my project? It's about aquatic ecosystem filtration using bacterial colonies to break down pollutants. For the next 15 minutes, Claire listened as Harper explained the intricacies of aerobic versus anaerobic decomposition, the role of beneficial bacteria in natural water purification, and the challenges of maintaining pH balance in a closed system. The terrarium itself was a masterpiece of 11-year-old engineering, layered substrates, self-regulating moisture control, and a population of aquatic plants that were apparently doing exactly what Harper had hypothesized they would do. This is remarkable. Most kids your age are still building volcano models. Harper's expressions suggested she'd heard this before and had opinions about volcano models. Volcanoes are fine for basic chemical reactions, but I wanted to solve a real problem. Mom always said science should be about asking questions that matter. The mention of Rebecca landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward. Nathan's hand moved to Harper's shoulder, a gesture so natural it seemed unconscious. Your mom taught you well. She'd be proud of this. Harper's eyes went bright, for a moment tears threatening, before she blinked them back with visible effort. Ms. Morrison, Claire, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to date my dad? The question arrived without preamble or social cushioning, delivered with the particular directness of children who hadn't yet learned that adults preferred euphemism and indirection. Nathan started to intervene. Harper, that's not appropriate. It's okay. Claire knelt down so she and Harper were eye level, a technique she'd learned in corporate negotiations applied to very different circumstances. Your dad and I are getting to know each other. I don't know if it's dating yet. Is that okay with you? I don't know. Last year, Dad went on a date, and afterward he was sad. I don't want him to be sad again. The honesty cut deeper than Claire expected. She glanced up at Nathan, saw him looking away as if giving her permission to handle this conversation without his interference. I don't want your dad to be sad either, but Harper hears something I learned when I was sick. Sometimes not trying something is sadder than trying and having it not work out. Your dad taught me that. Maybe now I need to teach him. Harper studied her with the intensity of someone weighing evidence against hypothesis scientist brain, engaged even in personal matters. Dad says you understand about being sick, that you were sick like Mom. I was. Different kind of sick, but yes, I still think about it every day. Do you miss who you were before? The question struck bone. Claire felt Nathan's attention sharpen beside her. Both of them suddenly focused on this moment where an 11-year-old had asked the thing adults usually avoided. Sometimes, but I can't go back. I can only go forward. That's what your dad says too, isn't it, about your mom being gone? Harper nodded slowly, some recognition passing across her young face. He says we can miss Mom and still be happy about today. Both things can be true. Your dad is very wise. The judges called for attention. Harper excused herself to prepare for her presentation. Claire stood feeling Nathan's presence beside her like heat from a furnace. That was well handled, thank you. She's protecting you. That's healthy. She's terrified I'm going to replace Rebecca. That me being happy means forgetting her mom. Claire watched Harper arranging her terrarium for optimal viewing, her small hands moving with practiced confidence. You know what I think? I think she's terrified you'll be happy and then lose it again. That's the thing about loving people who've been through trauma. You learn that happiness is temporary and loss is always waiting. Nathan's hand found hers, squeezed once, released. Is that what you learned when you survived? That's what I'm trying to unlearn, with your help. The judging took an hour. Harper won second-place blue ribbon certificate handshake from the principal who praised her scientific rigor and innovative application. The disappointment showed briefly in the set of her shoulders before she covered it with the kind of grace that suggested she'd learned early how to lose without falling apart. Second place is incredible, Claire said as they walked out toward the parking lot. You were competing against 8th graders. Statistically, you performed above your grade level. Harper's mouth twitched toward a smile. That's what Dad said, but first place would have been better. First place usually goes to people who've had more practice losing. You'll get there. They caravanned to Grant Park Harper, riding with Nathan in his truck, while Claire followed in her sedan. The festival sprawled across the south lawn, 30 food trucks arranged in a loose circle, live music from a stage near the lakefront, families and couples, and clusters of college students enjoying what might be Chicago's last warm weekend before winter made outdoor gatherings a test of endurance rather than pleasure. Harper spotted a face-painting booth and took off running, leaving Claire and Nathan standing together for the first time without 11-year-old supervision. She interrogated you. She's allowed. I'm a stranger potentially disrupting her family structure. You handled it better than I expected. Better than I would have handled it. They walked toward a taco truck, advertising authentic Oaxacan cuisine, the line stretching 20 people deep with the kind of patient enthusiasm that suggested the food was worth the wait. When I was diagnosed, everyone wanted to know how I was feeling, what I was thinking, whether I was scared. But nobody asked what I missed about the person I'd been before cancer. Harper asked that. It was honest. Nathan ordered for both of them fish tacos, the vendor's recommendation. They found a bench near the lake where the water stretched out toward a horizon that looked closer than it actually was. What do you miss? Claire bit into her taco, bought herself time to formulate an answer that wouldn't sound self-pitying or melodramatic. I miss feeling like my body was mine, like it was something I inhabited rather than something I survived. Cancer makes you hyper-aware of every system, every sensation, every potential failure point. 3 years later, and I still can't eat without mentally cataloging what's going into a stomach that's only 30% of what it used to be. Rebecca missed dancing. Before she got sick, she'd put on music and just move around the kitchen while cooking. After diagnosis, she stopped. Said her body didn't feel like hers anymore. Said it had betrayed her and she didn't want to celebrate it. Did she ever dance again? Once, about a month before she died. Harper had done something funny, and Rebecca laughed and then just started swaying. It wasn't really dancing anymore, she was too weak. But for about 30 seconds, she was herself again. The woman I married, the woman who existed before cancer, became the only thing that mattered. They ate in silence, watching Harper return with her face painted like a butterfly wings, spreading across her cheeks in colors too bright for someone who talked about bacterial decomposition with scientific precision. She's amazing, Nate. You've done an incredible job with her. I'm figuring it out day by day. Some days better than others. Claire took his hand, the gesture feeling both natural and terrifying. That's all any of us can do. The afternoon wound down toward evening, the autumn sun setting earlier each day as winter prepared its inevitable arrival. Harper returned to their bench, clutching a bag of kettle corn, her butterfly wings smeared from rubbing her eyes, but her mood elevated by sugar and sunshine and the particular joy of children who'd been allowed to exist without structure for an afternoon. Can we do this again? All three of us. Nathan looked at Claire, the question clear in his expression, even if he didn't voice it aloud. I'd like that, Claire said. If your dad would like that too. I would. His voice carried the weight of more than just confirming plans. I'd like to see you again. Just us, maybe. Without science fairs or festivals. Just dinner, just conversation, just real people being real with each other. The fear flickered, familiar, insistent warning her that real people got hurt and real conversations led to real rejections. But underneath the fear, something stronger pushed through. Possibility. Hope. The sense that Nathan Gallagher had looked at her scars and seen victory instead of damage. I'd like that too. They exchanged numbers officially, this time his contact information saved in her phone under Nate rather than the formal Nathan Gallagher she'd used before. Harper hugged Claire goodbye with the fierce enthusiasm of 11-year-olds who'd decided someone was acceptable, and Nathan held her gaze for 3 seconds longer than casual courtesy required. Driving home, Claire called Diane. So how was it? His daughter asked me what I missed about who I was before cancer. Jesus, what did you say? I told her the truth, that I missed feeling like my body was mine instead of something I survived. And what did he say? He understood. Not in the abstract way most people understand when they're trying to be supportive, but really understood. Like he'd watched someone he loved go through the same transformation and knew exactly what I meant. Diane was quiet for a moment. Are you going to see him again? Tuesday, dinner, just the two of us. Claire, be careful. but also don't be so careful that you miss what might actually be good. I'm trying. It's hard to unlearn 3 years of protecting myself. I know, but maybe protection isn't what you need anymore. Maybe you need someone who doesn't need you to protect him from your history. After they hung up, Claire sat in her car in the parking garage beneath her building and thought about Nathan Gallagher kneeling beside his daughter's terrarium, explaining the mechanics of moisture control while Harper corrected his terminology. She thought about the way he'd taken her hand at the festival casual and certain like holding her wasn't a burden he had to brace himself to carry. She thought about the 5 words he'd said in her office Thursday night, "I'm not going anywhere." For the first time in 3 years, Claire allowed herself to wonder if maybe possibly someone had actually meant it. Tuesday arrived with the kind of November rain that made Chicago feel like a city underwater. The sky pressing down gray and heavy, while water streamed along Michigan Avenue in rivers that overwhelmed the storm drains. Claire left work at 6, drove through traffic that moved like cold honey, and arrived at Cafe Baba Reba 15 minutes early because punctuality was the only armor she had left when everything else felt uncertain. Nate appeared at 6:30, exactly his hair damp from the walk between parking and entrance, his jacket carrying that particular scent of wool meeting rain. He spotted her at a corner table and something in his face relaxed as if he'd been holding tension she hadn't realized was there. "You came. Did you think I wouldn't?" He slid into the chair across from her, close enough that she could see water droplets still clinging to his collar. "I thought maybe you'd spent the weekend reconsidering whether dating your building's maintenance director was a good use of your time." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. She'd assumed he approached this with the same confidence he brought to fixing broken systems, but apparently fear lived in everyone regardless of how competent they appeared. "I spent the weekend wondering if you'd spent the weekend reconsidering whether dating someone with medical baggage was worth the risk." A server appeared with menus and water. They ordered without looking at the options, tapas meant for sharing small plates that would arrive throughout the evening and force them to stay longer than a single entree would allow. "Tell me about Rebecca, not the cancer part, the before part." Nate's hands wrapped around his water glass condensation, leaving rings on the wooden table. "Met her junior year of college. She was biology, I was engineering. She thought I was boring until I fixed her lab equipment centrifuge that kept stopping mid-cycle. Turned out to be a loose belt in a sensor that needed recalibration. She said anyone who could make machines behave was worth getting to know. Useful romance. That's what she called it. We got married at 25, had Harper at 30. Rebecca taught middle school science for 8 years. The good kind of teacher, the kind kids remember decades later when they were choosing careers or explaining why they love learning. When did the cancer start? Harper was 7. Rebecca found the lump during a self-exam. Stage 3 at diagnosis, which meant it had been growing for a while. The treatment timeline stretched across 2 years: surgery, chemo, radiation, more surgery. We thought we won. 6 months remission, then it came back in her bones, her liver, everywhere that mattered. The food arrived in waves. Patatas bravas, gambas, al ajillo, chorizo, dates wrapped in bacon. They ate with their fingers, passing plates back and forth in a rhythm that felt practiced, despite this being only their first real date. "What about before cancer for you, before the surgery that left scars?" Claire took a sip of wine, buying time to organize memories into narrative. "I was 33 when I got the promotion to VP, 35 when the stomach pain started. I ignored it for months, thought it was stress ulcers from too much coffee and not enough sleep. By the time I saw a doctor, the tumor had grown large enough that surgery meant removing most of my stomach along with surrounding tissue." "Did you have someone with you during treatment?" "My sister Diane. She took leave from her pediatrics practice, moved into my apartment for 6 months. Held my hair when I vomited from chemo. Drove me to appointments when I was too weak to handle Chicago traffic. Saved my life probably more than the oncologist did." "And after, when you were recovering?" Claire set down her fork, the questions settling over the table like smoke. "I waited a year before trying to date, met Mark through mutual friends. He was patient through 3 months of dinners and movies and careful conversations. Then I showed him what I've been hiding, and he explained he wasn't ready for that level of commitment. As if my scars were a marriage proposal, instead of just honest disclosure about who I'd become. Trevor. 6 months later, made it to the 4th date. I thought maybe this time would be different. He saw the scars and just left. Didn't say anything, just got dressed and walked out of my apartment like I'd revealed something unforgivable. Nate reached across the table, his hand covering hers with the kind of deliberate pressure that felt like an anchor. I meant what I said Thursday. I'm not going anywhere. But you don't know what you're signing up for. Quarterly checkups for the rest of my life. Anxiety every 3 months, wondering if the cancer's coming back. A body that doesn't work the way it used to and might never work normally again. Claire, his thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Rebecca's cancer taught me something. Life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. It doesn't pause while you work through fear or prepare for worst-case scenarios. You get today. That's the only guarantee anyone has. The restaurant filled around them as the evening progressed, couples and groups and solitary diners all occupying their own universes. But at their corner table, time moved differently, slower and more deliberately, as if they'd found a pocket of space where the normal rules didn't apply. They stayed until the kitchen closed, until the servers began stacking chairs and the manager dimmed half the lights in a gentle suggestion that even good conversations had to end eventually. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets still gleamed black and reflective under streetlights. Can I see you again? Soon, not in another week. Claire pulled her coat tighter against November cold. Thursday, my place. I'll cook, or attempt to cook. Fair warning, a reduced stomach means I've had to relearn what normal portions mean. I'll bring wine, and low expectations about portion sizes. Thursday came wrapped in clear skies and the kind of cold that made breath visible. Claire spent the afternoon stress cooking in her apartment, preparing portions small enough that her diminished stomach could handle them while still looking like an actual meal. Roasted chicken with herbs. Vegetables that wouldn't trigger the nausea that sometimes arrive without warning. Rice cooked soft enough to digest easily. Nate arrived at 7 with a bottle of red wine and the kind of ease that suggested he'd thought about this evening as much as she had. Her apartment revealed itself in ways her office never could. Bookshelves lined with novels she'd collected over 2 decades, a turntable and vinyl collection arranged by era windows overlooking Lincoln Park, where the trees had shed their leaves and stood bare against the darkening sky. You have records, actual vinyl, inherited from my parents. They were collectors in the 70s and 80s. I kept everything after they divorced. He moved to the shelves, fingers trailing across album spines with the reverence of someone who understood that physical objects carried weight beyond their function. Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Nina Simone. You have excellent taste in women with voices that could break your heart. My mother used to play Ella while cooking Sunday dinners. After the divorce, I'd put on her albums and pretend things were still whole. Nate pulled out an Ella Fitzgerald record, examined the sleeve with careful hands. Can we play this while we eat? Dinner passed to the soundtrack of Ella singing about love and loss and the space between wanting and having. They ate slowly, Claire conscious of her body's limitations and grateful that Nate never once looked at her small portions with the kind of concern that would have made the evening feel medical rather than intimate. After dishes were cleared and wine glasses refilled, Ella sang At Last, and Nate stood extending his hand in invitation. I haven't danced since Rebecca got sick. She used to love this song. Claire let him pull her into the small space between couch and coffee table. They swayed more than danced, his arms careful around her, as if he understood that trust required time and patience couldn't be rushed. Thank you for this, for being someone I can be real with. She leaned into his shoulder, felt his chin rest on top of her head, and thought about how bodies could fit together in ways that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with choosing each other anyway. Their third date happened on a Saturday when Harper stayed overnight with Margaret and William Gallagher, giving Nate an evening of freedom he rarely claimed. They met at his house in Evanston, ordered pizza from a place that had survived in the same location for 30 years, and settled onto his couch to watch a movie neither of them paid attention to. Halfway through the second act, Claire felt Nate's arms settle around her shoulders, felt herself lean into the warmth of him, felt the particular safety that came from being with someone who knew about scars and chose proximity anyway. Claire, his voice carried weight beyond her name. I want you to know I'm okay with whatever pace you need, whatever boundaries you want. I'm not in a rush. She turned to face him, their bodies close enough that breathing became a shared rhythm. What if I'm ready? What if I'm tired of being careful? Then tell me what you want. The words felt impossible and necessary all at once. She'd been protecting herself for so long that vulnerability had become foreign territory, a place she'd stopped traveling to because every previous expedition had ended in pain. I want you to kiss me, but I'm terrified you'll kiss me and realize I'm not worth the complication. Nate's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with the kind of gentleness that felt like a promise. That's not going to happen. But I need you to be sure. I need you to tell me yes. Yes, he kissed her like they had all the time in the world, slow and careful and full of attention to what she needed rather than what he wanted. Her hands found his chest, felt his heartbeat under her palms, counted the rhythm of a man who was staying rather than leaving. When they finally pulled apart, Claire was crying without quite knowing when the tears had started. I'm sorry, I don't know why. You're allowed. After everything you've been through, you're allowed to cry when something finally feels safe. They stayed on the couch until midnight, talking about childhoods and losses and the particular courage required to try again after life had already taken so much. When Nate walked her to her car, he kissed her goodnight with the same careful attention, and Claire drove home feeling like maybe possibly she was learning what it meant to be wanted rather than merely tolerated. 3 more dates followed across November and into December. Coffee shops where they talked until the baristas started wiping down tables with pointed efficiency. A museum where they wandered through exhibits without caring what they were supposed to be seeing. A bookstore where Nate bought her a first edition of something she'd mentioned loving as a teenager, and Claire felt tears threaten again because no one had listened that carefully to her casual remarks in longer than she could remember. By mid-December, 5 dates had turned into a pattern that felt suspiciously like a relationship. Harper had met Claire twice more, waiting once at a pizza place where the 11-year-old interrogated her about whether she thought genetic engineering would solve world hunger, and once at the Science Museum where all 3 of them spent 4 hours wandering through exhibits about everything from dinosaurs to space exploration. The 6th date arrived on a Saturday evening when Harper was at a sleepover, and Margaret Gallagher had called to confirm that, yes, her granddaughter would be staying overnight, and no, Nate didn't need to rush to pick her up Sunday morning. The subtext was clear enough that Nate had blushed when relaying the conversation, his mother apparently having decided that if her son was finally dating again, she would facilitate it with the efficiency of someone who believed life was too short for unnecessary delays. They decided on his house, a movie neither of them cared about, and the kind of evening that held potential for something more than careful conversation and restrained affection. Claire arrived at 7, her overnight bag left in the car because bringing it inside felt presumptuous, but her intention clear in the way she dressed, comfortable clothes that suggested she wasn't planning to leave early. The movie played while they navigated the familiar dance of bodies, finding comfortable positions on furniture not quite designed for 2 adults. By the 3rd act, Claire had stopped pretending to watch the screen. Nate's hand traced patterns on her shoulder that felt like some kind of code she was only beginning to decipher. I want to show you something. The full truth of what I've been hiding. He turned to face her, his expression serious in a way that made her heart accelerate. Only if you are ready. There's no timeline here except yours. She stood, felt her hands move to the hem of her sweater with the same deliberate motion she'd used in her office bathroom 8 weeks ago. But this time felt different, not desperate revelation born of exhaustion, but conscious choice made with someone who'd already proven he wouldn't run. The sweater came off, then her shirt. She stood before him in just her bra and jeans, every scar visible in the lamplight. The main incision carved across her abdomen like a map of survival. The smaller scars from drained tubes and additional procedures. The discoloration where tissue had been removed and skin had healed in patterns that didn't match what had been there before. Nate stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers, even as the scars demanded attention in her peripheral vision. He took her hands, held them between his own, and she watched his face for signs of the reaction she'd learned to expect, the careful neutrality that preceded excuses, or worse, the pity that suggested she was now something to be managed rather than desired. Instead, he leaned forward and kissed her forehead, then her cheek. Then with deliberate intention, he knelt. His lips pressed against the largest scar, the one that ran from sternum to hip. The sensation felt foreign and familiar and all at once, someone touching the part of her body she'd most wanted to hide, touching it with tenderness instead of clinical efficiency or horrified fascination. Thank you for trusting me with this, for letting me see all of you. The tears came hard and fast, the kind of crying that lives somewhere beneath language. Nate stood, pulled her against his chest, and held her while she sobbed out 3 years of shame and fear and the bone-deep exhaustion of believing she was unlovable. I've got you. I'm not going anywhere. Later, when the tears had subsided and Claire had pulled her clothes back on with shaking hands, they sat together on his couch and she felt something fundamental shift in her chest. Not healing exactly, healing took time and therapy and work she was still doing. But release. The sense that she'd been carrying weight alone and someone had finally stepped forward to help shoulder the load. Stay tonight, just sleep, nothing else unless you want more. But stay so you don't have to drive home alone after being that vulnerable. She stayed. They slept in his bed with her curled against his side and his arm around her shoulders. And every hour she woke up briefly just to confirm this was real and he was still there. Sunday morning arrived with weak December sunlight and the smell of coffee brewing. Nate made breakfast while Claire borrowed one of his sweatshirts and tried to process what had happened the night before. The intimacy of it, not sexual though, that had felt possible but emotional in ways that went deeper than bodies meeting. Harper's coming home at 11. You're welcome to stay and see her, or I can drive you back to your car if you'd rather not explain why you're here Sunday morning. Claire poured coffee into the mug he'd set out for her, thought about 12-year-old questions and the complexity of dating someone's parent. I'll stay. If she asks, I'll tell her the truth that I spent the night because your dad is someone I trust. Harper arrived home full of stories about the sleepover and questions about why Claire's car was parked in their driveway. Nate handled it with the straightforward honesty of a man who'd learned that children could handle truth better than deception. Claire stayed over last night. We watched a movie, and it got late, so she slept in the guest room. Harper looked between them with the particular assessment children develop when monitoring their parents for signs of change. Are you girlfriend-boyfriend now? Like officially, Nate glanced at Claire, the question clear in his expression, even if he didn't voice it aloud. Would that be okay with you? Claire knelt to Harper's level, the gesture becoming familiar between them. If your dad and I were officially together. Harper's face went through several expressions in rapid succession, uncertainty, calculation, something that might have been grief or might have been fear. I don't know, I need to think about it. December settled into its rhythm of shortened days and holiday decorations that appeared in windows and storefronts like small rebellions against winter's darkness. Claire and Nate continued seeing each other, dinners at restaurants that stayed open, late walks, through neighborhoods where Christmas lights turned ordinary houses into temporary art installations, conversations that ranged from philosophy to practicality to the particular challenges of loving people who'd been broken and were learning to function anyway. 2 weeks before Christmas, Nate invited Claire to Sunday dinner at his house. Proper dinner he'd specified, not just pizza and a movie, but the kind of meal that required planning and effort and signaled something beyond casual dating. Harper would be there. It would be the three of them navigating the domestic space where Rebecca's presence still lingered in photos and furniture and the accumulated memory of a life that had ended too soon. Claire arrived at 5 with a homemade apple pie that had taken 3 attempts to get right. Her reduced stomach meant she couldn't taste test properly, but Diane had talked her through the recipe over the phone and assured her that it looked acceptable even if the crust wasn't quite as perfect as their mother's had been. Harper answered the door, her expression carefully neutral. Hi, Claire. Dad's still cooking. Come in. The house smelled of roasting chicken and herbs. Photos lined the hallway, Harper at various ages, Nate and Rebecca on their wedding day family portraits that captured moments when everyone was still healthy and whole. Claire followed Harper to the kitchen where Nate stood at the stove apron tied around his waist, hair slightly disheveled from the heat of cooking. You brought pie. I attempted pie. No guarantees about quality. Harper took the pie carrier, examined it with the critical eye of someone who understood food as chemistry. It looks good. The crust is golden brown, which means you got the temperature right. Mom used to make pie too. Hers was better though. She won a ribbon at the state fair. The words landed like stones thrown into still water. Nate's hand stilled on the wooden spoon he'd been using to stir something that smelled of garlic and wine. Harper, that's rude. It's true, Mom's pies were better. She had a special technique for the crust. Claire set her purse down carefully, trying to navigate the sudden tension that had filled the kitchen. I'm sure they were wonderful. Your mom sounds like she was talented at everything she did. She was. She taught science and made art, and her pies won contests. She was the best. Dinner proceeded with uncomfortable silence filling the spaces between polite conversation. Harper answered in monosyllables when asked about school. Nate tried to bridge the gap with questions about Claire's work that she answered while watching Harper's face close down further with each passing minute. After dinner, Claire volunteered to help clean up. Nate washed while she dried their movements coordinated by weeks of learning each other's rhythms. Harper sat in the living room with the TV volume turned up louder than necessary. She's struggling. She's protecting you. This is the first woman she's seen you with since Rebecca died. It's threatening to everything she's built her security around. Nate's hands stilled in the soapy water. I don't know how to help her through this. I don't know how to explain that loving you doesn't mean forgetting her mom. Maybe you don't explain. Maybe you just let her feel what she's feeling and trust she'll work through it. The crash of something hitting the wall interrupted them. They rushed to the living room to find Harper standing with tears streaming down her face, a throw pillow on the floor where she'd apparently thrown it. I can hear you, talking about me like I'm not right here. Nate moved toward his daughter, but she backed away, her face twisted with anger and grief and the particular confusion of children trying to process emotions too big for their vocabulary. Harper, we weren't. You think I'm struggling. You think I'm scared. I'm not scared. I'm angry. Claire stayed near the kitchen doorway, instinct telling her this moment belonged to Harper and Nate, even as her presence had triggered it. Angry at who, sweetheart? At everything. At cancer for taking mom. At you for moving on. At Claire for making you smile when mom can't be here to see it. The words came out in a rush, each one carrying the weight of 3.5 years of accumulated grief that had been buried under science projects, in good behavior, and the particular responsibility children took on when they were trying to keep their remaining parent from falling apart. It's not fair. Mom was the best person. She taught me everything. She's gone, and you're just replacing her like she didn't matter. No one is replacing your mom, Harper. That's not what this is. Yes, you are. You're dating Claire. You smile now. You didn't smile for 2 years after mom died. And now you're happy, and it means you're forgetting her. Claire stepped forward, aware she was crossing a boundary, but unable to watch this child suffer without trying to help. Harper, look at me. The girl's tear-streaked face turned toward her anger and pain, mixing into something that looked like desperation. I can't replace your mom. I wouldn't try. Want to know why? Harper shook her head but didn't look away. Because she gave you life. She raised you. She taught you to love science and ask big questions. Every good thing about you came from her. No one can erase that. Not me. Not anyone. Those are yours forever. But I don't want to forget her. You won't. And here's something I learned when I was sick and scared and certain I was going to die. Grief doesn't disappear. It just makes room for other things. You can miss your mom and still be okay with your dad being happy. Both of those can be true at the same time. Harper's expression cracked, the anger draining away to reveal raw sorrow underneath. Do you miss who you were before cancer? Every single day. But you're still glad you're alive. Yeah, I am. Even with the scars. Especially because of the scars. They mean I fought hard enough to still be here. Harper's next question came out small and uncertain, the voice of a child rather than the almost teenager who'd been throwing accusations moments before. Did it hurt when you were sick? Yes, more than anything I'd ever experienced. Why are you asking? Because mom never said it hurt. She always told me she was fine. But I knew she was lying. I could tell she was in pain, but she kept saying everything was okay. Claire moved closer slowly, giving Harper space to retreat if she needed it. Your mom lied because she loved you. She didn't want you to be scared. But I was scared anyway. I was terrified every single day. Of course you were. Fear means you loved her, still love her. That's not something you have to give up to let other people in. Harper's shoulders shook with sobs. Nate wrapped his arms around his daughter while she cried, and Claire stayed near the edge of the room, bearing witness to grief that couldn't be fixed, but maybe possibly could be shared. Later, after Harper had exhausted herself and fallen asleep on the couch, Nate walked Claire to her car. Thank you for what you said to her about grief making room for other things. Did it help? I don't know, but it was honest, and I think that's what she needed more than reassurance. Monday morning brought a text from an unknown number. Can I ask you something? Claire stared at her phone during a meeting, then excused herself to the hallway to respond. Harper, is this you? Yes, Dad gave me your number. Is it okay if I text you? Of course. Did cancer hurt when you had it? The directness of the question made Claire's breath catch. She found an empty conference room, closed the door, and called instead of texting. Harper answered on the second ring. I thought that you might want to talk instead of text about this. Okay. Yes, cancer hurt. More than I can really explain. Why do you want to know? Because Mom never admitted it hurt. She always said she was fine. But near the end, I could tell she was lying. I could see how hard it was for her to even move. Why did she lie? Claire thought about the calculus Rebecca must have done weighing truth against a 7-year-old's ability to process suffering, choosing to carry the burden alone rather than make her daughter witness every moment of agony. She lied because she loved you more than she needed you to know the truth. She was trying to protect you even though you were scared anyway. I still get scared sometimes that Dad will get sick too, that I'll lose him like I lost Mom. That's a normal fear for someone who's experienced that kind of loss. Does your dad know you worry about this? I don't want to tell him. He already worries about me enough. Harper, here's what I think. I think you've been trying to be strong for him the same way your mom tried to be strong for you. But sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit when you're scared. Silence on the line. Then Harper's voice smaller than before. Do you think Mom would have liked you if she was still here? I don't know. I hope so, because I really like her daughter. I'm sorry I was mean about the pie. You were protecting your dad and your mom's memory. That's not mean. That's love. Could you maybe teach me to make your pea and I could teach you how Mom made hers so I could have both? The offer felt like a bridge being built, tentative and uncertain, but real. I'd like that very much. February arrived with temperatures cold enough to make Lake Michigan freeze along its edges. Claire and Nate had been dating for 4 months, navigating the complicated geography of two people learning to trust each other while carrying the weight of loss that never quite disappeared. Harper had warmed, gradually inviting Claire to help with homework assignments and explaining her current science project, something involving hydroponics, and whether plants could grow faster with certain types of music playing nearby. They'd settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable. Dinner twice a week at one of their houses, weekends that sometimes included Harper, and sometimes didn't, depending on whether Margaret Gallagher was available for grandmother duties. Conversations that ranged from practical logistics to deeper questions about whether love could survive the reality of bodies that failed and futures that refused to be predicted. On Valentine's Day, Nate suggested Lou Malnati's for deep dish pizza, the kind of Chicago institution that tourists lined up for, but locals knew to order ahead for pickup. They ate in his truck, overlooking Montrose Harbor, the heater running, and the radio playing quietly while they worked through pizza that was too hot and too heavy and exactly what the day required. I have something for you. Claire wiped pizza grease from her fingers, wondering what kind of Valentine's gift made sense 4 months into a relationship that felt both brand new and deeply established. Nate pulled a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. Her breath stopped. Before you panic, let me explain. Nate, we've only been dating 4 months, which in normal circumstances would be insane. But these aren't normal circumstances. When Rebecca died, I learned that life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. Time doesn't pause while you work through fear or prepare for the perfect moment. He opened the box to reveal a pearl ring surrounded by small diamonds. The pearl caught the dashboard lights and threw them back in colors that seemed impossible from something grown inside an oyster's pain. Pearls are created from irritation. A grain of sand gets stuck inside a shell, and the oyster builds layers around it, transforming something painful into something precious. That's what you did with your scars. That's what we're doing together, taking all the pain and loss and fear and building something beautiful around it. Claire's hands trembled as he continued, his words coming faster now, as if he'd rehearsed this moment, but was still terrified of her response. I don't promise you perfect. I don't promise easy, but I promise you real. I promise to show up every day. I promise not to run when things get hard. Claire Morrison, will you marry me? The world tilted. 4 months. They'd known each other for barely a season. But she thought about Mark and Trevor and the years she'd wasted protecting herself from exactly this kind of vulnerability. Thought about the way Nate had looked at her scars and seen victory instead of damage. Thought about Harper teaching her to make Rebecca's pie recipe while Claire taught Harper to make hers, both of them learning that love didn't require choosing between the past and the present. I'm terrified of the cancer coming back, of disappointing you, of Harper losing another person she's learning to love. I know, but being terrified doesn't mean we can't do this anyway. And you still want to, even knowing all the ways this could end badly. Especially knowing that. Because if Rebecca's death taught me anything, it's that refusing to love someone because you might lose them means you've already lost them. I'd rather have whatever time we get than waste it being too scared to try. Her yes came out as a whisper at first, then stronger, more certain. Yes, I'll marry you. The ring slid onto her finger, the pearl glowing against her skin like a small moon. Nate kissed her in his truck with pizza cooling beside them, and Lake Michigan frozen beyond the windshield, and the city lights of Chicago reflecting off low clouds overhead. They drove to his house to tell Harper, who had been in on the plan and was waiting with Margaret and William Gallagher in the living room. The 11-year-old screamed when she saw the ring, launched herself at Claire with enough force to nearly knock her over, and announced to her grandparents that she was getting a bonus mom, which was way better than a stepmom, because that sounded like someone was trying to replace the original. Margaret Gallagher pulled Claire aside while William and Harper debated whether the wedding should be in spring or summer. You're moving fast. I know. Believe me, I'm aware how insane this looks. Rebecca's been gone 3.5 years. Nate spent 2 years watching her die. Another 1.5 years learning how to be a single father. He's not rushing. He's refusing to waste time when he knows how short time can be. Are you okay with this, with me? Margaret's expression softened from assessment to something approaching acceptance. My son loves you. My granddaughter is happier than she's been since her mother died. That's what matters. But Claire, if you hurt them, either of them, you'll answer to me. I don't want to hurt them, but I'm terrified I will anyway, that my cancer will come back and they'll have to watch someone else they love get sick. That's a risk they're choosing to take. The question is whether you're brave enough to let them. Diane called 30 seconds after Claire texted her the news. You said yes after 4 months. I said yes after 4 months of learning that he sees my scars as proof of strength instead of evidence of damage. After watching him love his daughter through grief while managing his own. After realizing that waiting for the perfect moment means missing all the real moments. Are you sure, Claire, I watched you almost die? I held you while you vomited from chemo. I need to know you're sure about this. I'm not sure about anything. But I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions. Nate taught me that survival isn't the same as living, and I want to actually live. The engagement settled into their routine like furniture rearranged to accommodate a new resident. They told coworkers at Sterling Media, filed the updated relationship disclosure with Robert Hastings, and began the practical logistics of planning a wedding that both of them agreed should be small, simple, and focused on the people who actually mattered, rather than the spectacle weddings sometimes became. April arrived with the kind of warmth that made Chicagoans forget winter had ever existed. They'd settled on May 20th for the wedding 3 months away, long enough to plan, but short enough that neither of them had time to talk themselves out of what they'd committed to doing. Harper helped Claire pick a dress, the two of them spending a Saturday afternoon in bridal shops, while Nate stayed home and worked on the house repairs he'd been postponing for months. They found it in the third store, simple white, off the shoulder length, that would show her legs and the beginning of the scars that wrapped around her torso. You're not going to hide them. Claire looked at herself in the mirror, at the woman who'd survived cancer and rejection and 3 years of believing she was unlovable. Your dad taught me they're nothing to hide. Maybe other people need to learn that too. What if you made them beautiful like art instead of just scars? The idea grew from there. A henna artist who specialized in covering surgical scars, temporary designs that would transform Claire's scars into mandalas and patterns that told the story of survival in a language more beautiful than medical terminology could capture. When the henna artist finished her work the day before the wedding, Claire stood before a full-length mirror and cried. The scars were still visible beneath the intricate designs, But now they looked intentional rather than accidental, art rather than damage proof that pain could be transformed into something worth celebrating. Harper stood beside her, taking photos on her phone to document the transformation. "You look like a warrior, like someone who fought a battle and won. I feel like someone who spent 3 years hiding and finally decided to stop." The wedding took place at Chicago Botanic Garden on a Sunday afternoon when the cherry blossoms were at peak bloom and the weather cooperated with temperatures in the low 70s. 40 guests filled the chairs, arranged in a semicircle around the spot where Nate stood, waiting with his brother Kyle beside him as best man. Harper walked down the makeshift aisle first, carrying a bouquet of daisies and wearing a dress she'd picked out herself, practical, but pretty suitable for an almost 12-year-old who'd made peace with gaining a bonus mom even as she kept space in her heart for the mother she'd lost. Then Diane escorted Claire to where Nate waited, his eyes tracking her approach with the kind of attention that made everyone else disappear into background noise. The officiant spoke briefly about love and commitment and the courage required to choose each other. When both parties understood that bodies failed and time ran out and nothing was guaranteed except the present moment. Then Nate and Claire spoke their own vows, words they'd written separately, but that somehow echoed each other in ways that suggested they'd been learning the same language. Nate went first. "Claire, when Rebecca died, I thought that was it for me. I'd had my chance at love and it ended in a hospital room with machines beeping and my daughter crying in the hallway. Then you walked into my life, or I walked into your office, and showed me that love doesn't run out. It multiplies. You showed me your scars and trusted me not to run. That trust is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. I promise to earn it every single day. I promise to hold your hand through every doctor's appointment. I promise that when you're scared, I'll be brave enough for both of us, just like you've been brave enough for me." Claire's turn. "Nate, when we met, I was locked in my office, convinced I was unlovable. You saw through the executive armor straight to the terrified woman underneath. You didn't just accept my scars, you honored them. You taught me that survival isn't something to hide. I promise to let you in even when it's scary. I promise to remember that love isn't about being perfect. It's about being real. And I promise that no matter what happens, cancer scares, life complications, or just everyday struggles, I won't run. I'm not going anywhere either." The rings they exchanged carried inscriptions only they would see, Nate's band reading "Still Here" in letters small enough to require close examination. Claire's pearl ring joined by a wedding band that fit perfectly against it, completing a set that felt symbolic of two lives merging without erasing what had come before. When the officiant pronounced them married and Nate kissed her, Claire heard Harper's voice rise above the applause. "Finally, can we eat now?" The reception lasted 3 hours. Speeches kept short, dancing to songs that meant something. Food that came from Claire and Nate's favorite restaurants, rather than expensive catering designed to impress people they barely knew. At one point, Margaret Gallagher pulled Claire aside for a conversation that felt like formal acceptance into a family that had been fractured by loss and was learning to rebuild. "You're good for him, for both of them. Welcome to the family. I'll do my best not to disappoint." Everyone disappoints sometimes. The question is whether you stay and fix it or run when things get hard. I think you're a stayer. The night ended with Claire and Nate driving to a hotel downtown. Nothing fancy, just a place with a comfortable bed and enough distance from regular life that they could pretend the world had paused for 24 hours. In the dim light of a room 30 floors above Michigan Avenue, Nate helped her out of her dress with hands that trembled slightly, despite months of building toward this moment. "I'm still scared that you'll see me completely and change your mind. I've already seen you completely. This is just the next chapter of choosing each other." They made love carefully, learning each other's bodies with the patience of people who understood that intimacy required more than physical mechanics. Afterward, lying tangled together with the city lights visible through floor-to-ceiling windows, Claire felt something she hadn't experienced since before diagnosis: peace. Not the absence of fear, but the presence of something strong enough to hold fear without being consumed by it. "Thank you for not running." Nate's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me stay." Marriage transformed Claire's apartment into a way station, a place she visited on weeknights. When late meetings made the commute to Evanston impractical, But the Gallagher house became home in ways that had nothing to do with property ownership and everything to do with where her life actually existed. She moved her books to shelves that already held Nate's engineering manuals and Harper's science fiction novels. Her clothes filled half the master bedroom closet. Her coffee mugs joined the mismatched collection accumulated over years of garage sales and hand-me-downs. The blending happened gradually, furniture rearranged to accommodate three people instead of two routines negotiated through trial and error, and the occasional argument about whether dishes needed to be washed immediately or could sit overnight in the sink. Harper adjusted with the resilience of children who'd already survived worse disruptions than gaining a stepmother, though she made clear early on that bonus mom remained her preferred terminology, and anyone who suggested otherwise could expect a scientific explanation of why their word choice was incorrect. Friday nights became sacred dinner together with phones silenced, a rule Harper enforced more strictly than either adult. Saturdays meant household projects, the three of them working through repairs and maintenance that 2 decades of home ownership had deferred. Sundays belonged to whatever anyone needed most, whether that meant Harper's science competitions, or Claire's quarterly oncology appointments, or Nate's trips to the hardware store that somehow always took 3 hours because he stopped to help other customers figure out which wrench they actually needed. The first year passed in a blur of adjustment, learning to sleep beside someone who snored occasionally versus someone who never made noise. Negotiating bathroom schedules when 3 people needed showers before work and school. Finding space for emotions that arrive without warning. Claire's anxiety before doctor visits, Nate's grief on Rebecca's birthday, Harper's anger when someone at school said something stupid about stepmothers. Year 2 brought easier rhythms. Claire learned which of Harper's moods needed space versus intervention. Nate figured out when Claire's silence meant she was processing versus when it meant something was actually wrong. Harper discovered that having 2 parents instead of 1 meant she could play them against each other for exactly 1 day before they compared notes and shut down whatever manipulation she'd attempted. Work settled into sustainable patterns. Claire maintained her position at Sterling Media, turning down the promotion to chief operating officer that would have required 60-hour weeks and constant travel. Nate stayed in facilities accepting a raise, but refusing the management position that would have moved him to an office where he couldn't use his hands to fix actual problems. They saw each other at work, occasionally passing in hallways, exchanging brief smiles that carried the weight of shared nights and morning coffee, and the particular intimacy of people who'd chosen to build a life together. By year 3, Claire's quarterly oncology appointments had become routine enough that the fear didn't paralyze her for weeks beforehand, though it never disappeared entirely. Nate attended every single one, sitting beside her in waiting rooms that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, holding her hand when the nurses called her name, waiting in examination rooms while Dr. Patel reviewed scans and blood work and physical examination results. The appointments always ended the same way. Dr. Patel's face would brighten, fractionally professional reserve, cracking just enough to show genuine pleasure beneath the medical objectivity. Clear, all markers normal, no signs of recurrence. See you in 3 months. Then they'd drive home and Claire would cry in the passenger seat while Nate drove, not because the news was bad, but because survival required so much constant effort and sometimes the relief felt as exhausting as the fear. Year 4 brought Harper's 13th birthday and the particular chaos of a teenager who'd inherited her mother's brilliance and her father's stubbornness. She pushed boundaries the way scientists test hypotheses systematically, recording results, adjusting variables until she found the limits that actually held versus the ones that collapsed under sustained pressure. "You're not my real mother, so you can't tell me what to do." The phrase emerged during an argument about curfew, Harper's voice carrying the particular venom of teenagers who knew exactly which words would cause maximum damage. Claire stood in the doorway of Harper's bedroom looking at the girl who'd been 11 when they met and was now nearly as tall as she was, anger radiating off her in waves that felt almost physical. "You're right, I'm not Rebecca. I'll never be Rebecca. But I'm the adult in this house who cares whether you get home safely and the curfew stands. I hate you. You're allowed to hate me." The curfew still stands. Harper slammed her door. Claire walked downstairs to where Nate was pretending to read the newspaper while actually monitoring whether his wife and daughter were going to survive their first major confrontation. "She hates me. She hates that you won't let her do what she wants. There's a difference." "I don't know how to do this. I didn't sign up to be a parent to a teenager." Nate set down the paper, pulled her onto the couch beside him. Yes, you did. Maybe you didn't think about it explicitly when you said yes to marrying me, but Harper was part of the package. You knew that. I knew it intellectually. I didn't understand it would feel like this loving someone who looks at you with Rebecca's eyes and tells you she hates you because you won't let her stay out past midnight. Welcome to parenting. It's terrible and you can't quit. Harper apologized 3 days later. Her rage burned through and replaced by the particular embarrassment of teenagers who'd said things they couldn't take back. I don't actually hate you. I was just mad. I know, and the curfew still stands. I know, Dad already explained that consequence and emotion are separate variables, and I can't manipulate one by expressing the other. Your dad is very wise. He's also annoying, but I guess you both are, so at least you're consistent. Year 5 arrived with Harper in her junior year of high school college applications looming like storm clouds on a horizon that had previously seemed safely distant. Claire turned 43, Nate turned 46. They celebrated with dinner at the same Italian restaurant where they'd had their first real date, and Claire thought about the woman who'd shown her scars expecting rejection, and instead had found someone who'd built a life around those scars without ever suggesting she needed to hide them. The house in Evanston had absorbed Claire completely by then. Photos of her alongside photos of Rebecca, not replacing, just adding. Her career achievements framed on walls beside Nate's certifications and Harper's academic awards. The guest room converted into an office where Claire worked remotely on Fridays, the space slowly filling with her presence until it no longer felt like guest space, but rather her territory within the larger geography of their shared home. Harper's acceptance to Northwestern University for pre-med arrived in March fat envelope containing scholarship information and orientation schedules, and confirmation that she'd followed her mother's path into science while charting her own course through it. The celebration dinner that night felt weighted with significance. Their daughter, because Harper had become theirs in ways that transcended biology, was leaving. Not far, just to campus housing 20 minutes away, but leaving nonetheless. Are you going to cry at drop-off? Harper directed the question at both of them while dissecting her chicken with surgical precision. Absolutely. Nate didn't pretend otherwise. I cried when you started kindergarten. I'll definitely cry when you start college. Claire. Probably. You've become someone I love, which means watching you leave is going to hurt, even though I know it's healthy and right. Good. I'd be worried if you didn't care enough to correct him. Summer arrived with the particular bittersweet quality of seasons that marked endings and beginnings simultaneously. They took Harper on a trip to Washington, D.C., visiting museums and monuments in all the places Rebecca had wanted to show her daughter before cancer had stolen that possibility. At the Lincoln Memorial, Harper stood reading the Gettysburg Address carved into stone, and Claire saw her cry for the first time in years. Mom would have loved this. She always said history and science were the same thing, just asking questions about different kinds of evidence. Nate wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. She would have loved seeing you heading to college. Would have been so proud. I wish she could be here for it. She is here, in your laugh, in the way you think about problems, in every part of you that's brilliant and stubborn and determined to understand how things work. She's here because you're here. August brought move-in day. Northwestern's campus buzzed with the organized chaos of freshman orientations, students hauling boxes, parents hovering with advice. Nobody wanted to hear the particular energy of hundreds of 18-year-olds convinced they were ready for independence while secretly terrified of what that independence actually required. Harper's dorm room measured maybe 12 feet square. She'd drawn a roommate who seemed pleasant enough, a girl from Indiana who wanted to study engineering and seemed equally overwhelmed by the transition they were navigating together. This is it. Harper surveyed her new space with the same analytical attention she'd once directed at terrarium ecosystems. Home for the next year. Claire and Nate unpacked boxes and practiced coordination, years of working together, translating into efficient arrangement of clothes and books, and the small refrigerator that would hold midnight snacks and leftover dining hall food. When everything was organized and there were no more tasks to justify lingering, they stood awkwardly in the hallway while Harper walked them toward the exit. Call if you need anything. I will. Even if you don't need anything, just to check in. I will, Dad. Your mom and I are really proud of you. Harper hugged him first, then turned to Claire. The embrace lasted longer than usual, Harper holding on with the kind of desperation that suggested maybe she wasn't quite as ready as she'd been pretending. Thank you for everything, for loving Dad when he needed someone to love, for not trying to be my mom but being my mom anyway, for staying. Thank you for letting me stay. They cried in the car on the way home, both of them, and when they walked into the house, it felt cavernous in ways it never had before. Too quiet, too empty, too full of the absence of someone who'd filled 17 years with noise and science projects and the particular chaos of raising a child. We did good. Nate's voice carried certainty despite the tears still tracking down his face. She's ready. She's terrified. Good. Fear means she's smart enough to know the stakes. She'll be fine. The house adjusted around Harper's absence. Dinners became quieter. Weekends stretched longer. Claire and Nate rediscovered the relationship that had existed before parenting dominated their attention. Long conversations that didn't get interrupted. Spontaneous decisions to see a movie or drive to a restaurant they'd never tried. The particular luxury of being a couple rather than a family unit. 8 years cancer-free arrived in October with the same quarterly appointment that had become as routine as Claire's life allowed any medical interaction to become. Dr. Patel smiled while reviewing scans, nodded while reading blood work results, and delivered the verdict that never lost its power despite repetition. Clear, completely clear. You're officially in the low-risk category now. We can move to twice-yearly appointments instead of quarterly. The relief hit differently this time, not just the familiar wash of gratitude for survival, but the sense that maybe possibly she'd earned the right to stop living in 3-month increments and start planning for longer timelines. That night, Nate proposed a second honeymoon. Nothing extravagant, just a week in Colorado, hiking trails they'd never had time to explore, while raising a teenager and managing careers and navigating the constant anxiety of medical uncertainty. They went in November after the aspens had lost their leaves, but before snow made the high country impassable. 7 days of thin air and mountain vistas and nights in a cabin with a fireplace and no internet connection. They talked about what came next, whether Claire would ever feel ready to retire from Sterling Media, whether Nate wanted to start his own contracting business now that Harper's college was funded, whether they wanted to travel more or stay rooted in Chicago or find some compromise between wandering and staying. What do you want? Not what's practical or responsible. What do you actually want? Claire thought about the question while watching alpenglow paint distant peaks in colors that lasted only minutes before darkness claimed them. I want to stop feeling like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. I want to wake up without immediately calculating whether today might be the day everything falls apart. Do you think you can get there? I think I'm trying. Having you helps. Knowing that someone sees me completely and stays anyway makes it easier to believe I'm worth staying for. You are. Worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth everything. They made love that night with the kind of presence that required nothing from the future. Just attention to the current moment and the bodies they inhabited and the choice they kept making to build something together, despite all the ways it could break. The call came on a Tuesday morning in July, 10 years after they'd married, and 15 years after Nate had walked into Claire's office to fix a heating vent. Harper's voice on the phone carried the particular pitch of someone trying to stay calm while everything inside them screamed panic. It's Dad. He collapsed during his morning run. The ambulance is here. Claire was in a meeting with regional director's laptop open to quarterly projections that suddenly meant nothing at all. She closed the computer, grabbed her purse, and walked out without explanation or apology. The drive from downtown to Northwestern Memorial took 23 minutes through midday traffic that crawled with the particular indifference of a city that didn't care about individual emergencies. Harper waited in the emergency room, still in her scrubs, from her shift at the hospital, where she'd just started her residency 3 weeks earlier. At 22, she looked simultaneously too young for the white coat and too exhausted for someone who should have been at the beginning rather than in the depths of medical training. They think it's his heart. Cardiac event, they're saying. He's stable, but they're doing tests. Claire pulled Harper into a hug, feeling the younger woman shake against her shoulder. Where is he? Bay 7. They said family only. I'm family. The curtained area smelled of disinfectant and fear. Nate lay on a gurney with monitors beeping their steady rhythm, oxygen tube beneath his nose. his face pale in the fluorescent lighting that made everyone look half dead regardless of actual prognosis. His eyes opened when Claire took his hand. "Hey, beautiful. Don't you dare, hey, beautiful me. What happened, Ed?" Was running, then chest pain, then woke up here. Dr. Patterson appeared a cardiologist in her mid-40s who carried charts and the particular authority of someone comfortable delivering news that would alter lives. "Mrs. Gallagher, I'm Dr. Patterson. Your husband had what we're classifying as a cardiac event, not a full myocardial infarction, but warning signs we take very seriously. His LAD artery shows 70% blockage. We need to perform angioplasty and insert a stent. Today." The words landed like stones. Claire heard them individually but couldn't quite assemble them into meaning. Nate, who fixed everything and ran every morning and had seemed invincible in ways she'd never been had a heart trying to quit. Is he going to be okay? With the stent and lifestyle modifications, prognosis is excellent. But this was a warning we can't ignore. After Dr. Patterson left to schedule the procedure, Claire climbed onto the gurney beside Nate, despite hospital policies and the narrow space that wasn't designed for two people. She pressed her face against his shoulder and felt his arm come around her even though the IV lines limited his movement. "I'm not going anywhere." His voice carried recognition of what she'd done, taken his words from 15 years ago, and returned them at the moment he needed them most. "That's my line." "Not anymore, it's mine now. You taught me how to be someone who stays. Now I'm staying for you." "I'm scared, Claire. I watched Rebecca die. I know what comes after the hospital rooms and the procedures and the promises that everything will be fine. I know how this story can end." She lifted her head to look at him directly, this man who'd seen her scars and built a life around them, and was now showing her his own vulnerability in ways he'd never quite allowed before. "Then we face it together, the way you faced everything with me. We don't get to choose whether bodies fail. We only get to choose whether we fail each other. And we won't. I promise you we won't." The angioplasty took 2 hours. Claire and Harper sat in the waiting room making conversation that meant nothing, just noise to fill silence while Nate was somewhere beyond doors they couldn't pass through his heart, being threaded with wires and stents, and the kind of medical intervention that saved lives but reminded everyone involved that bodies were fragile and time was finite. When Dr. Patterson finally emerged, her face carried the kind of measured optimism that meant success but not celebration. "The procedure went well. One stent placed in the LAD artery, blood flow restored. He'll need to stay overnight for observation, but if all goes smoothly, he should be home tomorrow." They were allowed in for 15 minutes every hour. Nate looked smaller in the hospital bed, diminished in ways that had nothing to do with actual size and everything to do with seeing someone powerful rendered temporarily powerless. Claire sat beside him, holding his hand, while machines beeped their documentation of heartbeats and oxygen levels and the invisible mechanisms that kept humans functioning. "I hate this, being the patient, being the one who needs care instead of giving it. Welcome to my world. It's terrible and you can't quit." He smiled despite the oxygen tube and the monitors and the reality of a heart that had tried to fail. "Using my parenting advice about Harper against me. That's fighting dirty. I learned from the best." That night, after visiting hours ended and Harper had gone home to sleep in her childhood bedroom, Claire sat alone in her car in the hospital parking garage and called Diane. "Nate had a heart attack. Minor, they're saying, but enough that they had to put in a stent. He's going to be okay, but Diane, I'm terrified." "Of course you are. You love him. Fear is what love costs." "What if I lose him? What if I'm the one who has to watch someone I love deteriorate while I stand by helpless?" "Then you'll face it the way he faced it with you, with presence and courage and showing up every single day, even when showing up is the hardest thing you can imagine doing." "But Claire, he's not dying. He had a warning and they fixed it. This isn't the beginning of the end. It's just life reminding you both that time matters." The first week home from the hospital passed in careful navigation of new routines. Cardiac rehabilitation 3 times a week, medications that had to be taken at specific times, dietary restrictions that eliminated half the foods Nate had grown up eating, activity limitations that felt suffocating to someone whose identity was built around physical competence and the ability to fix problems through direct action. "I feel useless. I can't work. Can't fix things around the house. Can't even walk upstairs without getting winded. Claire set down the vegetables she'd been chopping. Heart-healthy meals had become her new specialty and moved to where he sat at the kitchen table, looking defeated. You're recovering. That's not nothing. That's actually the most important work you can do right now. Rebecca used to say that when she was sick, that recovery was work. I never understood what she meant until now. And what helped her when she was struggling with feeling helpless? Me taking over everything. But you already have a full-time job. You can't spend all day managing my recovery. Then let Harper help. She's in residency at the hospital where you were treated. She knows more about cardiac recovery than either of us. Harper moved home for August, her residency schedule, allowing flexibility that she arranged specifically to help with her father's rehabilitation. She implemented exercise protocols with the precision of someone who'd inherited both parents' stubbornness, making Nate walk prescribed distances and refusing to accept excuses when he tried to do more than his body was ready to handle. You can't rush this, Dad. Heart tissue needs time to heal. Push too hard and you risk another event. I'm going crazy sitting around doing nothing. You're not doing nothing. You're letting your body repair itself. That's actual work, even if it doesn't feel productive. 6 weeks post-heart attack. Nate returned to work on modified duty. Half days. No heavy lifting. No climbing ladders or working in spaces that required physical exertion his damaged heart couldn't sustain. The restriction felt like amputation core parts of his identity, removed and replaced with limitations that reminded him constantly that his body had betrayed him in ways he couldn't fix through skill or determination. Claire found him in the garage one Saturday in September, staring at his tools with the kind of longing usually reserved for lost lovers. I can't do my job anymore. Not really. They're accommodating me, but I'm not actually useful. I'm just taking up space until I recover enough to be the person I used to be. She sat beside him on the workbench, their shoulders touching. You feel like your body isn't yours anymore. Like it's something you survived instead of something you inhabit. Yes, exactly that. How did you know? Because that's what cancer did to me. Made me hyper-aware of every system that could fail, every sensation that might signal recurrence. I stopped trusting my body to just work and started monitoring it like a machine that might break down at any moment. How did you get past it? I'm not sure I have, but being with you helped. Knowing someone saw me completely scars and fear and constant anxiety and stayed anyway made it easier to believe I was more than just a survival project. Nate turned to face her, his expression carrying something between gratitude and grief. I have a scar now, from the catheter. It's tiny compared to yours, but I can't stop looking at it. Can't stop thinking about what it represents. Show me. He hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt enough to reveal the small mark on his chest where the cardiologist had threaded instruments into his heart. Claire leaned forward and kissed it, her lips pressing against the evidence of his mortality with the same tenderness he'd shown when kneeling before her scars 15 years ago. This scar saved your life, just like mine saved me. They're not marks of failure. They're proof we fought hard enough to still be here. His arms came around her, then holding her with the kind of desperation that spoke to how terrified he'd been and how carefully he'd been hiding it. I don't want to die, Claire. I have so much I still want to do, so much time I still want with you. Then we fight for that time, together, the way we've fought for everything else. 12 weeks post-heart attack, Dr. Patterson cleared Nate to return to full duty with the caveat that his full duty needed to be redefined to accommodate a heart that would never quite be the same as before. He worked out a compromise with Sterling Media, fewer physical tasks, more supervision and training of younger facilities. Workers, a role that used his knowledge without requiring the physical exertion his body could no longer sustain. The adjustment happened gradually, identity shifting from the man who fixed everything to the man who taught others how to fix things. It felt like grief, sometimes mourning the loss of who he'd been before while learning to inhabit who he was becoming. But Claire understood grief had lived with it for years while learning to exist inside a body that cancer had rearranged. And she walked beside him through the transition with the kind of patience only someone who'd survived similar transformation could offer. October arrived with the particular clarity that comes when seasons shift and the year begins its descent toward darkness and cold. Nate woke early on the 15th of Tuesday and found Claire already awake beside him. Happy anniversary. It's not our wedding anniversary. That's in May. Different anniversary. 15 years ago today, I walked into your office to fix a heating vent and met the woman who would fix everything broken inside me. She turned to face him in the pre-dawn darkness. I didn't fix anything. I just showed you my scars and hoped you wouldn't run. You fixed my ability to imagine a future beyond grief. You fixed my capacity to love someone again. You fixed the part of me that thought Rebecca's death meant my chance at happiness died with her. Later that morning, after Harper had arrived for weekend breakfast, and the three of them sat around the kitchen table eating the heart-healthy meal Claire had prepared, Nate cleared his throat with the particular sound people make when they're about to say something significant. I have a plan for today, if you are both available. I'm off shift until Monday. What kind of plan? It's a surprise, but we need to leave at 5 o'clock. Dress nice but comfortable, and Claire pack an overnight bag. The drive to Chicago Botanic Garden took 30 minutes through Saturday afternoon traffic. When they pulled into the parking lot, Harper figured it out first. You're renewing your vows. That's why we're here. This is where you got married. Nate smiled in the rearview mirror. Your mom is very smart. Family waited at the Japanese garden pavilion. Margaret and William Gallagher, now in their late 70s, but still healthy enough to make the trip from their retirement community in Wisconsin. Diane had driven up from Indianapolis. Kyle Gallagher stood beside a small table decorated with fall flowers. His wife, Rebecca, yes, they'd named their daughter after Harper's mother, holding their 2-year-old son, who'd been named Nathan after his uncle. String quartet played the same Ella Fitzgerald songs that had been playing the day they married. Fairy lights hung between trees that had lost their leaves but maintained their architecture against a sky turning orange and purple with sunset. What is this? Nate took Claire's hand, led her to the table where Kyle waited with a box in his hands. 15 years ago today, I walked into your office terrified that you'd see right through my professional competence to the broken widower underneath. You did see through it, and instead of running, you showed me your own brokenness. Made me realize that maybe two incomplete people could be complete together. He opened the box to reveal a new ring, 15 small diamonds arranged in a circle around the original pearl. 15 diamonds for 15 years, one for each year we've survived together. Cancer scares, heart attacks, raising a teenager through rebellion and grief, every challenge that tried to break us and failed because we refused to break each other. Claire's eyes filled vision, blurring the edges of the scene until all she could see clearly was Nate's face. I can't promise you forever. My heart proved that we don't get guarantees, but I can promise you today, tomorrow, every day I have. This ring is my renewal, my commitment, my promise that even when I'm scared, especially when I'm scared, I'm still not going anywhere. He slid the ring onto her right hand, the diamonds catching the last light of the setting sun and throwing it back in patterns that seemed impossible from metal and stone. Your turn. Claire hadn't prepared anything, hadn't known this was coming, but words found her anyway, rising from 15 years of learning what it meant to be loved completely. When I was diagnosed with cancer, I thought my life was ending. Not just because I might die, but because I believed no one would want someone scarred and broken. You looked at my scars and saw victory, looked at my fear and saw courage. You taught me that survival wasn't something to hide, it was something to celebrate. She pulled a journal from her purse, the leather-bound book Nate had given her on their first anniversary, now filled with 15 years of entries documenting their life together. You started this, writing about us, about your feelings. I continued it, added my own entries. Now it holds 15 years of our story, every anniversary, every cancer scare, your heart attack, Harper's graduations, all the moments that mattered, and some that only seemed to matter in retrospect. She opened to the last page dated that morning and read aloud. 15 years ago, a kind man walked into my office and said 5 words that changed my life. I'm not going anywhere. Today I say them back. To him, to our daughter, to this life we've built from scars and second chances. We're still here, against all odds. Still here. Harper had been filming on her phone but set it down to pull them both into an embrace that lasted longer than any of them expected, the three of them holding each other, while family watched and string quartet played and the day finished its transition into evening. You two are disgusting with your emotions and vow renewals and being in love after 15 years. I love you both. The dinner that followed felt less like a ceremony and more like a gathering of people who'd chosen to stay connected despite the forces that could have pulled them apart. Margaret Gallagher cornered Claire near the dessert table with a fierceness that belied her 77 years. You saved my son. When Rebecca died, I thought he'd never recover. Thought he'd spend the rest of his life just going through motions. Then you showed up and gave him a reason to actually live again. He saved me too. I was drowning in fear and isolation. He threw me a lifeline and refused to let go, even when I tried to push him away. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Both people taking turns drowning and rescuing until you're old enough that you just hold hands and try not to fall down together. Later, driving home with just Claire in the passenger seat, Harper had stayed to catch up with cousins. She rarely saw Nate reach for her hand at a stoplight. Thank you for today, for being surprised, for crying, for saying yes to all of this 15 years ago and every day since. Thank you for asking, for not giving up when I was too scared to believe someone could want me, for teaching me that love isn't about one person being strong. It's about taking turns, catching each other when we fall. They drove past the neighborhood where Claire's old apartment had been the building now converted into condos she could never afford even with her VP salary. Past Lincoln Park, where they'd walked on early dates pretending to look at trees while actually just finding excuses to be near each other. Past Northwestern Hospital, where both of them had been patients, where Harper now worked saving other people's lives because her parents had taught her that survival was worth fighting for. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't walked into my office that night? Nate's hand tightened on hers. Sometimes, but it feels like asking what would have happened if the sun hadn't risen. You and me, it feels inevitable, like we were always going to find each other regardless of heating vents or chance encounters. Even with all the complications, the cancer scares your heart attack, all of it. Especially because of all that. We're not together despite the hard things. We're together because we know how to face hard things. That's not something you find with just anyone. That's worth every scar and every fear and every moment of uncertainty. The house felt different when they walked inside, not emptier, despite Harper's absence, but richer, weighted with memory and presence and the accumulated meaning of 15 years lived inside walls that had witnessed arguments and laughter and the unglamorous reality of two people choosing each other every single day. That night, they made love slowly, bodies 15 years older than when they'd married, but more familiar, more attuned to what the other needed and could give. Afterward, lying tangled together while Chicago night sounds filtered through windows, they'd forgotten to close. Claire traced the small scar on Nate's chest where the catheter had entered. Does it still bother you? The reminder that your heart tried to fail? Less than it did. Now it just feels like evidence. Proof that we survived something else that tried to break us and couldn't. We've survived a lot, and we'll survive whatever comes next. Together. That's the only certainty either of us gets. Not that bodies won't fail, or that time won't run out, but that whatever happens, we face it together. Claire thought about that truth while watching shadows move across the ceiling, headlights from passing cars creating temporary constellations that appeared and disappeared with mechanical regularity. 15 years married, 18 years cancer-free, 6 months since Nate's heart attack. All of it adding up to a life that hadn't gone according to any plan she'd imagined, but had become more meaningful than plans ever could have created. I'm not scared anymore. Nate shifted to look at her directly. Of what? Of losing you. I mean, I'm still scared. That fear doesn't just disappear, but it's different now. I'm not letting fear stop me from living fully in whatever time we have. You taught me that survival isn't the same as living. I want to live, Nate, with you, for however long we get. 5 years passed with the particular speed of time when life achieves equilibrium. Harper completed her residency and accepted a position as an attending physician in Northwestern Memorial's emergency department, following her mother into medicine, but choosing emergency care over teaching, wanting to save lives in immediate crisis rather than shape young minds over semesters and school years. She met someone, a fellow doctor named Marcus Chen, No relation to any of Nate's former coworkers, a man whose parents had emigrated from Taiwan and who'd grown up in San Francisco, speaking three languages and playing violin at a level that suggested professional potential before medicine had claimed his attention instead. Harper brought him to family dinners with the particular nervousness of someone introducing a person they loved to people whose opinions mattered, and Marcus proved himself by asking intelligent questions about Nate's facilities work and complimenting Claire's cooking and treating Harper with a kind of respect that suggested he understood what he was getting, a brilliant, stubborn woman who'd lost one parent and refused to lose anyone else she loved. "Are you going to marry him?" Claire's question came during a Saturday morning when Harper had come over to help transplant the garden plants that had outgrown their containers. Marcus was at the hospital, a schedule conflict that gave them time for the kind of honest conversation that required his absence. "He hasn't asked yet, but I think he will. Maybe this year, maybe next. He's deliberate about decisions, wants to make sure we're ready before we commit." "Are you ready?" Harper's hands stilled in the dirt, her expression carrying the weight of someone thinking deeply about a question that mattered. "I'm terrified. Marriage feels like promising forever when I've already learned that forever doesn't exist. Mom died. You almost died. Dad almost died. What if I marry Marcus and then lose him? What if I'm setting myself up for grief?" "You are, that's what love costs. But Harper refusing to love him because you might lose him means you've already lost him. You just miss out on all the good parts too." "Is that what you told yourself when you were deciding whether to trust Dad?" Claire thought back to that Thursday night 15 years ago when she'd lifted her blouse and shown her scars to a stranger who'd responded by promising to stay. "I told myself that being alone was worse than risking rejection. That protecting myself from pain had become its own kind of pain. Your dad taught me that survival without connection isn't really survival at all." "Do you think Mom would have liked him, Marcus, I mean, if she were still here?" "I think your mom would love anyone who made you happy, and he clearly makes you happy." Harper pulled her into a hug, dirt-covered gloves and all, and whispered against Claire's shoulder, "Thank you for being someone I could talk to about this, for being my bonus mom all these years, for loving Dad when he needed someone to love him." Marcus proposed on Harper's 27th birthday with a ring he'd commissioned from a jeweler who specialized in custom designs. The stone wasn't a diamond, but a pearl, deliberate reference to Claire's engagement ring, and the story Harper had told him about how pearls were created from irritation, pain transformed into beauty. The symbolism felt heavy-handed, until Harper explained through tears that it was perfect, exactly right, proof that Marcus had been paying attention to the details of her family history and understood that he wasn't just marrying her but accepting the whole complicated legacy she carried. The wedding was planned for the following spring, 18 months away, to give them time to organize something bigger than Nate and Claire's intimate ceremony, while still keeping it focused on what actually mattered: commitment, family, the choice to build a life together, despite uncertainty about what that life might contain. 20 years after Nate had walked into Claire's office to fix a heating vent, they sat on their back porch watching the sun set over the neighbor's trees. Harper had moved in with Marcus, the house empty again, in ways that felt different than when she'd left for college. This time the emptiness felt permanent, a chapter closed, rather than a season passed. "Do you remember what you said that first night when I showed you my scars?" Nate's arms settled around Claire's shoulders, familiar weight that had become as essential as breathing. "I said I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't believe you. Thought it was something men said when they wanted to seem noble but would disappear the moment things got complicated. And then things got very complicated. And you stayed through every cancer scare and Harper's teenage rebellion and your heart attack and all the normal daily struggles of two people trying to share a life. You stayed. Where else would I go? Everything that matters is right here." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind only possible between people who'd learned each other's rhythm so completely that words became optional. 20 years of marriage, 23 years cancer-free, 5 years since Nate's heart attack with no recurrence, his cardiac rehabilitation so successful that Dr. Patterson had finally admitted he was managing his condition better than 90% of her patients. "Harper asked me yesterday if I miss who I was before cancer. What did you tell her?" "That I miss that person sometimes. But I don't think I'd want to go back even if I could." Everything I am now, everything we are together came from surviving that. The scars made me someone who could recognize strength when I saw it, someone who could value presence over perfection, someone who could be real with you instead of pretending to be whole. Nate pulled her closer, his chin resting on top of her head in the position they'd occupied thousands of times over 2 decades. The scars made us who we are, both of us, mine and yours. All the ways our bodies tried to fail, and we fought back and survived anyway. Snow began falling lightly. October snow rare but not impossible in Chicago, flakes appearing in the yellow glow of streetlights like small promises of winter ahead. Still here? Claire's voice carried the weight of 2 decades asking that same question, receiving that same answer, building a life on the foundation of mutual presence that refused to be shaken even when everything else trembled. Still here, they stood together, breath visible in cold air, and walked back inside the house that had absorbed 20 years of their shared existence. Behind them, footprints in fresh snow marked where they had been. Ahead, through windows, warm with interior light, their future waited, uncertain, finite, but theirs to build together for however much time remained. The next morning brought clear skies and temperatures cold enough that Lake Michigan steamed where water met air. Claire and Nate drove to Chicago Botanic Garden without plan or announcement, just shared instinct that the place where they'd married deserved a visit on an anniversary the calendar didn't acknowledge, but their hearts marked anyway. The Japanese garden pavilion stood empty, fall leaves scattered across paths meant for spring weddings and summer visitors. They walked hand in hand to the spot where they'd exchanged vows 20 years ago, where Nate had renewed those vows 5 years ago, where their story had been witnessed by family and marked by promises that they'd somehow managed to keep despite all the ways life had tried to break them. I'm glad you walked into my office that night. I'm glad you showed me your scars instead of keeping them hidden. I'm glad you stayed. I'm glad you let me. The words felt inadequate for 20 years of choosing each other, but inadequacy had never stopped them before. They'd built a marriage from inadequate bodies and inadequate courage and inadequate certainty about the future, proving that sometimes inadequate was exactly enough. They turned to leave, footsteps crunching through leaves that would be buried under snow within weeks. Behind them, the pavilion stood empty, but not forgotten, witness to vows spoken and kept and renewed and lived out in the unglamorous reality of shared bathrooms and morning coffee and the particular intimacy of two people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. Wild horses couldn't drag me away. Claire smiled, recognizing the line from a song that had played at their wedding, transformed over 20 years into private language that meant everything they couldn't quite articulate about love and survival and the choice to keep choosing each other. I know you never did.